Imagine walking into a crowded room, eyes scanning the faces around you, and yet all you can see is him, the one who, in every subtle interaction, refuses to acknowledge your presence with the warmth you crave. He's not cruel, at least not intentionally, but there's a certain distance, an almost imperceptible coldness, that ignites a fire within you. Why does it feel like the very act of ignoring fuels a desire stronger than mere attraction? Why does your mind cling to him even as your heart whispers warnings? This is not a superficial fascination. This is an obsession, deeply rooted in the psyche, and it speaks to something far older and more elemental than modern notions of dating or social dynamics. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Here lies the first unsettling truth. The men who seem indifferent are mirrors, reflecting back hidden voids, unacknowledged longings, and unconscious patterns buried deep within. When a woman encounters a man who ignores her, her psyche does not simply register disinterest. It perceives a challenge, a mystery, a riddle that must be solved. What begins as casual intrigue often evolves into a psychic tug-of-war, pulling her attention with irresistible force. But why does the mind amplify this absence? Psychology suggests that human beings are wired to value what is scarce. Scarcity creates tension, and tension produces engagement. Yet, there is a deeper, darker layer beneath this simple evolutionary mechanism. As Schopenhauer observed, wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. Pleasure is like poison. The more we taste it, the more we crave it. Similarly, emotional unavailability acts as a form of psychic toxin. It is both painful and intoxicating, and the paradoxical nature of the desire it sparks creates a feedback loop of obsession. Consider the emotions at play: the longing, the self-doubt, the intoxicating hope that the next glance, the next word, the next small gesture will pierce the armor of indifference. It is not merely attraction. It is a confrontation with the unknown. Human desire, Jung might argue, is drawn to what is unconscious, to the shadow within, and these men often symbolize that shadow, qualities she represses, fears, or unconsciously venerates. The man who ignores becomes a vessel for projection, carrying not only imagined allure but also unresolved psychological tension. Yet, there is a societal script that compounds this phenomenon. From adolescence, cultural narratives romanticize the chase, equate persistence with proof of worth, and normalize emotional pursuit as a measure of self-value. The disinterested man, in a way, is not just a man, he is a symbolic gatekeeper. The pursuit becomes a journey not toward him, but toward self-validation, a dangerous dance between ego, desire, and the fragile architecture of self-esteem. As Aldous Huxley once observed, experience is not what happens to a man, it is what a man does with what happens to him. In these dynamics, obsession is not accidental. It is cultivated, shaped by both inner psychic patterns and external reinforcement. Here lies the paradox. The very act of ignoring generates a magnetic pull, yet it also triggers profound existential unease. The mind senses that the desired object is simultaneously attainable and forever elusive, a tension that mirrors the eternal struggle between conscious aspiration and unconscious compulsion. What begins as a simple social interaction becomes an initiation into a deeper psychological truth. Human desire often follows paths of resistance, not ease, and it thrives most in the terrain of the unavailable. The mind, when confronted with indifference, begins to weave narratives that are part fantasy, part projection, and entirely compelling. She imagines moments that never happened, possibilities that may never exist, and meanings in gestures that were never intended. In these constructions, the man who ignores becomes more than a person. He becomes a symbol, an enigmatic force representing power, autonomy, or qualities she herself feels she lacks. The psychological weight of absence is paradoxical. The less tangible the object, the more it dominates thought, amplifying the magnetic pull toward him. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. The shadow represents all the traits, desires, and impulses that the conscious mind refuses to accept. When a woman becomes obsessed with a man who ignores her, she is often drawn not to him per se, but to the shadow he awakens within her. In his words, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Her obsession is a subtle invitation to confront aspects of herself she may fear or deny. Vulnerability, neediness, competitiveness, or even her own capacity for indifference. The ignored man is a mirror reflecting these qualities, daring her to recognize what she has suppressed. Philosophers have long noted that desire thrives not in fulfillment, but in tension. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "The demand to be loved is the greatest of all arrogance." When a man ignores, the usual scripts of affection, approval, and recognition are withheld, and the psyche instinctively escalates its investment. She chases, not because she necessarily loves him in a conventional sense, but because the denial triggers an existential test. Am I worthy? Can I command his attention? The pursuit is less about him and more about the internal validation she seeks. A painful, obsessive dance with self-esteem that often leaves her exhausted, yet unable to disengage. Biologically and psychologically, the mind interprets scarcity as value. Neurochemically, uncertainty activates the brain's reward system. The intermittent reinforcement, the rare smile, the fleeting glance, releases dopamine in bursts far more potent than consistent attention. The emotional circuitry of desire is hijacked by unpredictability. But this is not simply a matter of biology. It is an existential mechanism. The ignored man represents what is unattainable, and humans have always been compelled by what they cannot fully possess. The mind equates absence with challenge, and challenge with meaning. Yet, there is a deeper existential echo. In pursuing the unavailable, she confronts the essential loneliness of the human condition. Jean-Paul Sartre observed, "Hell is other people." The ignored man becomes both object of desire and emblem of existential tension. His absence forces her to navigate her own interior landscape, her insecurities, and the yearning for recognition that can never be fully satisfied externally. Desire becomes a meditation on freedom and limitation, on what is projected outward and what must be reconciled inward. Thus, obsession is not a random psychological glitch. It is a profound encounter with the unknown within herself. She is drawn to the unavailable man because he awakens the shadow, ignites the tension of scarcity, and embodies the existential puzzle of recognition, longing, and self-worth. In this psychic interplay, the man is less a person and more a catalyst, an emotional stimulus that forces introspection, confronts avoidance, and exposes the contradictions of desire. The paradox is clear. In seeking him, she is seeking herself. In longing for him, she confronts the unacknowledged dimensions of her mind and heart. And it is precisely this duality, the magnetic attraction to absence and the haunting awareness of the inner void, that intensifies obsession, making it psychologically compelling, philosophically rich, and emotionally perilous. Obsession, at its core, is often an intricate dance between desire and ego. The ignored man becomes a mirror for self-image, a measure of worth, and a yardstick for validation. Each moment of indifference is a subtle judgment, a silent metric by which she gauges her own value. In this way, the obsession is less about him than about the fragile architecture of her ego, trembling under scrutiny. She is compelled not simply to win attention, but to assert significance, to convince herself that she matters, that she is seen, and that her desires are not trivial. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on human motivation, noted, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." The ignored man represents precisely such a challenge. He cannot be controlled, persuaded, or easily understood. The absence of reciprocal attention forces an internal confrontation, often unwelcome, with the structures of identity, worth, and desire. Obsession, then, becomes a form of existential training, painful, repetitive, and unrelenting. Attachment theory adds another layer of complexity. Psychologically, some women respond to emotional unavailability with heightened attachment, seeking connection where it is least forthcoming. The brain interprets intermittent attention as intensely rewarding, and uncertainty magnifies desire. The mind fixates on the chase, often rationalizing indifference as a test of worthiness or as evidence of hidden depth. Here, the pursuit is both a coping mechanism and a trap. The more she invests in securing his recognition, the more her ego becomes entwined with a man who, in many ways, cannot fulfill her deepest needs. But obsession is never solely about attachment. It is about meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre observed that humans are condemned to freedom, forced to create significance in a universe indifferent to their desires. The ignored man, by withholding attention, creates an existential canvas upon which she paints her hopes, anxieties, and projections. Her imagination is both refuge and prison. Each imagined glance, each fabricated nuance, reinforces the illusion of connection, while simultaneously deepening the psychological spiral. There is also an ethical dimension, often overlooked. In chasing the unavailable, she may neglect the relational or moral integrity of her own choices. The obsession blinds her to reality, transforming nuance into moral certainty. She constructs elaborate narratives to justify pursuit, excusing intrusion, self-sacrifice, or emotional volatility. Nietzsche's words resonate here. He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby becomes a monster. In the act of pursuing someone who ignores, she risks losing clarity, becoming a distorted version of herself in the very effort to assert self-worth. Furthermore, the social and cultural context compounds this pattern. Stories, films, and literature romanticize persistence and obsession, equating difficulty with desirability. From adolescence, women are conditioned to read indifference as challenge, scarcity as worth, and resistance as proof of value. The mind internalizes these scripts, overlaying them on the raw biology and unconscious shadow work previously discussed. The ignored man is not just a man. He is a narrative, a psychological emblem, a character in a story written by her own unconscious. And yet, the paradox persists. She seeks him to assert herself, to define her ego, to find meaning. But in doing so, she often amplifies her vulnerability, her emotional instability, and her internal conflict. Obsession is both a mirror and a magnifier, reflecting hidden aspects of the self while intensifying the very anxieties it exposes. The pursuit, seemingly external, is profoundly internal, a confrontation with desire, ego, and the unconscious forces that shape human behavior. Obsession rarely thrives in the realm of reality. It exists in the mind's theater, where perception, projection, and imagination stage a drama far more intense than any lived interaction. The man who ignores is not merely absent in attention. He is absent in definition, leaving a blank canvas upon which the psyche projects fears, desires, and ideals. In this psychic alchemy, he becomes a vessel for qualities she both craves and fears, the embodiment of strength, autonomy, mystery, and forbidden allure. Carl Jung emphasized the power of projection. Everything that we see in others is a projection of ourselves. In this context, obsession is less a reflection of him and more a reflection of her inner conflicts, unacknowledged impulses, and unmet needs. The ignored man functions as an archetype, a symbol resonating deep within the collective unconscious. He is the unattainable hero, the dark stranger, the silent sage whose absence triggers a narrative of pursuit. Archetypes operate on a level beneath reason, stirring desire and fear simultaneously. The psyche instinctively interprets absence as challenge, mystery, and value. The deeper the indifference, the more powerful the archetype becomes. A shadow figure both alluring and intimidating, representing qualities she may secretly admire or wish to cultivate. This dynamic amplifies the role of projection in obsession. The woman invests in him traits he may not possess: emotional intelligence, insight, charm, or even moral superiority. Her imagination fills the gaps left by indifference, and the more she invests, the more compelling he becomes. Aldous Huxley observed, "Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. In this case, the mind refuses to take the absence for what it is. Instead, it converts scarcity into significance, creating meaning where reality may offer none." Her fixation is not evidence of his worth, but of her need for narrative coherence and emotional fulfillment. Yet there is an existential undertone. The mind craves what eludes it not simply because it is scarce, but because in scarcity lies the reflection of her own incompleteness. Jean-Paul Sartre's notion of bad faith emerges here, the tendency to externalize responsibility for desire and to confuse projection with reality. By obsessing over a man who ignores, she displaces the confrontation with her own desires and shadows onto an external target. The pursuit becomes an illusory engagement with selfhood, a way to avoid facing the emptiness, anxiety, or vulnerability within. The paradox deepens. Desire thrives in tension, but the tension is largely fabricated by the unconscious mind. Every glance interpreted as fleeting interest, every silence construed as secret depth, intensifies obsession. The unavailable man becomes an enigma precisely because the psyche constructs him as one, layering uncertainty with hope, absence with imagined meaning. This interplay of projection and archetype generates a psychic feedback loop. Obsession feeds on absence, absence feeds on projection, and projection feeds back into obsession. There is also a shadowed moral dimension. By elevating him into a symbolic ideal, she invests energy that could be directed toward authentic relationships or personal growth. Nietzsche's insight resonates once more. Invisible threads are the strongest ties. These threads, spun by imagination, projection, and archetypal resonance, bind her attention to absence itself. She is captivated not by who he truly is, but by the narrative her unconscious mind has spun. And paradoxically, the more she chases, the more entrenched the illusion becomes, until desire becomes indistinguishable from self-reflection. A mirror turned outward, yet revealing her own inner terrain. In the theater of obsession, absence is not emptiness. It is stimulus, challenge, and invitation. The ignored man awakens projection, archetype, and existential tension simultaneously, drawing her into a vortex of desire that is as psychologically compelling as it is philosophically revealing. In essence, she pursues not a man, but the shadow, the ideal, and the unacknowledged dimensions of herself, a pursuit as illuminating as it is perilous. Obsession is not purely a philosophical or psychological phenomenon. It is deeply biological, wired into the very circuitry of the human brain. The man who ignores does not merely withhold attention. He manipulates, intentionally or not, the neurochemical processes that govern desire. Each rare smile, fleeting acknowledgement, or subtle gesture triggers the brain's reward system, flooding it with dopamine in unpredictable bursts. This intermittent reinforcement mirrors the psychology of addiction. The mind, uncertain of reward, becomes hyper-focused, compulsively anticipating each moment of validation. Viktor Frankl's insight into human meaning resonates here. Between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose his response. In that choice lies his growth and his freedom. Yet in obsession, the freedom to respond is hijacked by neurochemical impulses, leaving desire and compulsion intertwined. The mechanism is both simple and insidious. Predictable attention, consistent approval, or mutual interest produces calm satisfaction but little tension. Scarcity, uncertainty, and unpredictability, however, create psychological friction, heightening attention and amplifying emotional investment. Every gesture is loaded with potential meaning. Every silence becomes pregnant with possibility. The mind interprets absence as challenge, and challenge is equated with value. Here, psychology, biology, and existential need converge. She is drawn to him not because he is objectively superior, but because his elusiveness triggers the alchemy of desire within her own neural and emotional architecture. Arthur Schopenhauer once observed, "Compassion is the basis of morality, but desire is the basis of our suffering." Obsession exemplifies this duality. Desire becomes a source of suffering precisely because it is intertwined with hope, longing, and intermittent reward, the very mechanism that ignites fascination. The unpredictability of attention also ensures that her engagement deepens over time. Her mind craves not just connection, but the emotional challenge, the tension between longing and frustration. The psychological feedback loop is relentless. Hope triggers reward circuits, disappointment triggers pursuit, and each cycle strengthens the attachment to absence. Yet obsession is not confined to the mind. The body participates in this drama, responding to tension with heightened arousal, restlessness, and subtle physiological cues. The heart races at imagined possibilities. Adrenaline spikes at every perceived signal. Cortisol rises with each perceived slight. The ignored man becomes not only a psychological presence but a somatic one, embedding himself into the very rhythms of her body. Jean-Paul Sartre's notion that humans are condemned to freedom resonates on a bodily level here. Her body responds as if in a dance with fate, tethered to desire while struggling for control, caught in a liminal space between compulsion and conscious choice. This neuropsychological perspective illuminates why detachment seems so impossible. It is not merely a matter of willpower or rational insight. The brain and body have evolved to respond to uncertainty, to chase scarcity, and to invest meaning in elusive objects. The ignored man triggers primal drives, unconscious projections, and existential tests simultaneously. Aldous Huxley captured the complexity of such human experience. Experience is not what happens to a man. It is what a man does with what happens to him. The obsession becomes a crucible, testing her capacity for reflection, self-awareness, and intentionality amidst the entanglement of mind, body, and emotion. Thus, the magnetic pull of the unavailable man is not a mere social curiosity. It is an intricate interplay of neurochemical triggers, psychological projection, and existential tension. Every slight, every absence, every glance reinforces a cycle that is part addiction, part meaning-making, and part confrontation with the shadow within. In this synthesis of mind, body, and spirit, desire becomes a force that cannot be fully rationalized, only understood and navigated with courage, insight, and awareness. Obsession, when left unchecked, becomes a mirror of the psyche's unexamined corners, a reflection of shadow, projection, and unmet desire. Yet it need not remain a trap. The journey from compulsion to understanding requires a radical confrontation with the forces that fuel fixation. The interplay of ego, neurobiology, and archetypal projection. Carl Jung reminds us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In the context of obsession, this insight becomes transformative. To transcend the magnetic pull of the ignored man, a woman must confront the darkness within, the insecurities, unmet needs, and projections that sustain the spiral of desire. The first step is recognition. Obsession thrives on denial and unconscious repetition. By acknowledging the patterns, why the unavailable man captivates her, what voids he seems to fill, and how intermittent reinforcement hijacks attention, she gains the possibility of agency. Viktor Frankl's observation resonates. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. She may not be able to change his behavior, but she can change her response, her interpretations, and her investments. The pursuit shifts from external validation to internal clarity, from a compulsive chase to conscious reflection. Next comes integration, the qualities projected onto the ignored man. The strength, autonomy, mystery, and depth she so admires are rarely absent in reality. They are latent within herself. The obsession becomes a guidepost, pointing toward development rather than acquisition. Nietzsche's wisdom echoes here. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. By redirecting focus inward, desire transforms from a source of torment into a source of insight. She begins to cultivate the qualities she sought externally, recognizing that fulfillment is not granted by elusive attention but forged within. The social and cultural scripts that romanticize pursuit must also be questioned. Obsession is reinforced by narratives that equate struggle with value, scarcity with desirability, and persistence with proof of worth. By disentangling personal desire from cultural myth, she regains sovereignty over attention and meaning. The man who ignores is no longer a master of her psychic landscape. He becomes a teacher, a mirror, and a symbol of lessons learned rather than a source of validation deferred. Finally, transcendence requires acceptance. Desire and longing are not erased, they are human. but they are integrated, acknowledged, and understood. Jean-Paul Sartre observed, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." She exercises freedom not by controlling the unavailable man, but by reclaiming her attention, interpreting absence without compulsion, and transforming psychic tension into conscious growth. Obsession, in this sense, is a passage, a crucible in which self-awareness, autonomy, and resilience are forged. In the end, the phenomenon of women becoming obsessed with men who ignore them reveals profound truths about the human condition. Desire is inextricably linked to absence, projection, and unconscious tension. Obsession thrives on mystery, intermittent reward, and unresolved shadow. Yet these patterns, when illuminated, can become pathways to self-understanding. The ignored man, rather than a tormentor, becomes a teacher. Absence becomes a mirror, and longing transforms from a trap into an invitation for consciousness. This journey is neither quick nor easy. It demands patience, reflection, and courage to confront uncomfortable truths about self, desire, and attachment. But in doing so, she discovers not only why she was drawn to him, but why desire itself is both perilous and illuminating. A window into the complex interplay of mind, body, and soul, and an opportunity to transcend fixation into insight, freedom, and authentic self-realization.